Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Reepiron, and today we're going to be doing another bracket fight. This is against all of the Sharpshooter weapons in Killing Floor 2. These have been assorted randomly. I've tried to do this once already, but I forgot the FAL, so I had to put that in here. Alright, so in our first fight we have the Mosin versus the Beluga beat. These are very interesting weapons to go against one another right away. Shot for shot, the Mosin will do more damage than the Beluga beat. The Mosin also has the bayonet, which can be really useful in close combat. It will body shot most small enemies and headshot them. It can even headshot most medium enemies with a few stabs from it. It has the longest reach out of any of the melee weapons, even though this one doesn't count as a melee weapon for whatever reason. Besides the special attack from the Ion Thruster. The Ion Thruster does have longer reach than this. You can also reload the Mosin faster than the Beluga beat, I believe. I don't know. I don't think you can shoot it faster, though. And the Beluga beat mostly gets a lot of its advantage for just its utility. With both of its fires, it can knock enemies around pretty easily. It counts as doing microwave damage, which is pretty good since microwaves do high damage towards the larger Zeds. Although this one is quite good for just bullying large Zeds. You can just keep spamming this at them. You don't even need to be that accurate, and you will push them back. You can kind of do the same thing with the Mosin, it won't push them back. Spamming the Mosin isn't too bad of an idea, honestly. It does pretty high damage per shot. Both of these weigh about the same. Both of them scale pretty well with upgrades. The Mosin, I would say, it scales better. And if I wanted a designated, just general purpose weapon, a sharpshooter, I'd probably go with the Mosin. If I want a specialized weapon for bullying, particularly bosses, the Beluga beat is really good for that, especially if you get somebody like King Fleshpound. You can just pretty much force him against a wall, and he can't do much, so that is really strong. But I think the Mosin is probably the better overall weapon in this case, whereas the Beluga beat is a highly specialized weapon. So you can take both these weapons in combination, and I have done that, and it does work out quite well. So I think I'd pick the Mosin over the Beluga beat. Up next we have the Spitfire or the Cryo Bow. This one's also interesting. You do get a melee weapon, the Cryo Bow. You also get ice arrows, which is pretty good. The arrows will do more damage per shot than the Spitfire. Not too surprising. It's a tier 2 weapon versus a tier 5 weapon. The Spitfire does make for a good secondary, though, dealing high damage to small enemies because the fire is quite strong. It's mostly small and medium enemies. You can burn them very easily, and if you're taking this weapon, that's probably your intent, is just using this against small enemies, and for that, it's pretty good. It also only weighs 2 weight, which is good because it works with any of your weapons. This one is kind of difficult to pick from because I honestly don't use the Cryo Bow that much. I think I use the Spitfire actually more on Sharpshooter, which is a little bit weird. But I think the Cryo Bow is better than the Spitfire is, at least as a primary weapon. The Spitfire works really well as a secondary weapon, though, and works really well with other loadouts. Alright, the Centerfire or the 1858. The Centerfire, I would say, has better sights than the 1858. It weighs more than the 1858, but it does a lot more damage. This only weighs 5, this weighs 2, so you do still have more of an advantage. You have more weapons you could take with a single pistol, not too surprising. Both these weapons are pretty cheap. Both of them hit pretty hard. Both of them scale well with upgrades, but I think that the Centerfire scales better, and I'm going to give this to the Centerfire. And the last matchup in this bracket is another interesting one. We have the crossbow versus the 50 cal. Both these weapons do high single target damage. The 50 cal does about double, or actually I think it's more than double what the crossbow does, but it also weighs twice the amount that the crossbow does. The crossbow has arguably better sights. This has one of the best scopes on it out of anything in the game, and I don't know why it's not on more weapons. You do technically have infinite ammo with the crossbow if you're willing to go pick up your shots, and you do actually have more ammo overall with the crossbow than you do with the 50 cal, which is weird. 50 cal weighs a lot at 12, this weighs 6, so crossbow is much more flexible. I think the crossbow is actually probably going to win here, because even though the 50 cal completely destroys Skrakes and Fleshpounds, the crossbow can actually do the same thing, just not as effectively. But you have more options to take with this weapon. So I think just its flexibility beats out the 50 cal overall. Alright, the Mosin or the Cryo Bow. The Mosin will do more damage per shot, I believe, than the Cryo Bow, although they're pretty comparable. Both these actually have melee weapons attached that I think do the same amount, but the Mosin does have a longer reach with it. You do get more shots with the Mosin, so you can shoot it quicker. You can go pick up your arrows, though, with the Cryo Bow, which is an advantage, unless you're using them as the frost arrows, then I believe that they break up on impact. The Mosin does weigh less than the Cryo Bow. You can actually take these both in combination, too, and I have done that, and that has worked as well. I think the Mosin scales better with upgrade. Yeah, the Mosin scales better with upgrades because the Cryo Bow doesn't upgrade, so it will even do more damage per shot. I think I'm going to give this one to the Mosin. I like the Mosin more than the Cryo Bow. Alright, then we have the Centerfire versus the Crossbow. Both these weapons are really cheap. Both these weapons weigh about the same. Both these weapons hit really hard. And both these weapons scale really well with upgrades. They also have nice sights. I think the crossbow has nicer sights. The crossbow can punch through more enemies than the Centerfire can. The Centerfire could also potentially take longer to reload than the crossbow can, depending on how many shots you fired out of each of them. Both these weapons work really well against medium enemies. Both of them work really well against large enemies. The crossbow can do okay against small enemies because it shoots at least fast enough to deal with them, but it's nowhere near as good as the Centerfire is. The Centerfire is also more flexible with the weapons that you can take with it, and less specialized. So I think I'd give this one to the Centerfire over the crossbow. And then our last matchup on this bracket is the Mosin versus the Centerfire. This one's pretty difficult because both these weapons I would consider really good. The Mosin weighs more than the Centerfire, actually taking it to somewhat of an awkward weight because you can't take some of your real heavy-hitting weapons with it, although it is a heavy-hitting weapon. The bayonet on it gives it some added utility. It does have pretty good sights, and the Centerfire sights are decent as well. The Mosin can reload faster than the Centerfire. Assuming the Centerfire didn't just need to reload 1 or 2 shots, then I think the Centerfire can reload quicker. Both of these scale really well with upgrades. Both of them make good primary weapons. The Centerfire makes a good secondary weapon, though, too. And against small enemies, I would say the Centerfire is generally better. But against large enemies, they're both pretty comparable, with the Mosin being a little bit better. Favored for that. I think because of the flexibility, I'm going to give this one to the Centerfire, but this one's really difficult. I like both these weapons a lot. Alright, up next we have the M14 versus the Railgun. Railgun does way more damage per shot than the M14 does. The M14 has more shots, can do more damage per second, assuming you don't just have a big lineup with the Railgun or something. The M14 and the Railgun both have about the same sights, which really aren't my favorites. The Railgun does have a secondary fire. Well, its primary fire is the lock-on mode, but I never use that. I always just use the regular shot, because if you're using the lock-on mode with the Railgun, you're doing half the amount of damage that it can do. The Railgun weighs 9, which does make it a bit of an awkward weight, but you can take other weapons like the Centerfire or the Winchester with this, which is a good option. The M14 weighs 7, which is like the same as the Mosin, which puts it at a somewhat awkward weight. I actually like the M14 with the Mosin in combination. I think that's a good combination for Sharpshooter. If I was only to have one of these weapons, and it was just you only get one and you have to fight at as many enemies as possible, or a bunch of mixed enemies, I would definitely pick the M14 over the Railgun, simply because it's more flexible in that way. So in solo, I would still probably say the M14 is better. Although the Railgun combined with something like the Winchester or like the Centerfire can be pretty comparable to the M14. So I'm going to give this one to the Railgun. We have the Winchester versus the 500 Magnum. Both these weigh about the same. The Winchester will do less damage per shot unless it's fully upgraded, and then it will do more damage per shot than the 500 Magnum will do. The 500 Magnum only holds 5 shots, but you do get to reload all 5 of those at once. The 500 Magnum definitely has more recoil than the Winchester. The Winchester also has better sights than the 500 Magnum. Like I said, the Winchester scales incredibly well with upgrades. It only weighs 4 to start out with, so it's very flexible with other weapons. The 500 Magnum is also quite flexible with other weapons. This one could go either way, but I think as a general purpose weapon, I would take the Winchester over the 500 Magnum for most instances. Close matchup though, and then the FAL moves on because it's the only thing there. Alright, the Winchester versus the Railgun. Railgun does more damage. Railgun could take longer to reload, again depending on how many shots you need to reload for the Winchester. Winchester has better sights, I would say. Winchester scales really well with upgrades. The Railgun does too. Winchester is a better general purpose weapon than the Railgun is. You can definitely kill more small and medium enemies with it than the Railgun. But the Railgun does have much higher damage. These weapons in combination work really well together, and I really enjoy them. This one's actually a really tough choice, because the Winchester, I honestly think, is one of the most underrated weapons in this game. Even though a lot of people really enjoy it, it's really good. The Railgun is just really strong, though, and I think I'm going to give it to the Railgun. Alright, Railgun versus the FAL. Alright, so Railgun, more damage per shot, about the same sights because they both have that ACOG-ish sight on them. I mean, the FAL is an ACOG sight. I don't know what the Railgun's technically considered. You get more shots with the FAL, you get a lot more damage per second, at least consistently, than the Railgun. Obviously, if you're shooting through multiple people with a Railgun, you can get more damage per second that way, and more damage per shot. Now, the FAL can use something like the Mosin, or use something like the M14, or the Centerfire, or Winchester, anything like that, and do really well. I think I would still give this one to the Railgun for its raw damage, though. Alright, then we have the Centerfire versus the Railgun. The Centerfire is very good with upgrades. It's a solid all-around weapon. You can pair it really well with the Railgun, and these two in combination might be one of the best combos for Sharpshooter right now. You have, I would say you'd have better sights with the Centerfire than with the Railgun. The Railgun sights aren't the best. Centerfire is pretty good at fighting everything though, since it scales so well with upgrades. It's quite strong at fighting flesh pounds, scrakes, any medium enemy, any small enemy, whereas the Railgun is more specialized to just big things like scrakes and flesh pounds. I think I might actually go with the Centerfire here, because the Centerfire works really well against everything and works really well both as a primary and a backup weapon. It does have somewhat of a slow reload speed, but that's about its only downside, whereas the Railgun has a slow reload speed and only really works well against large Zeds and is less flexible than the Centerfire is. I think I'm going to give it to the Centerfire then. That one's really close. There's a lot of really good weapons with Sharpshooter, and I really like using a lot of the weapons from Sharpshooter. The Mosin might be one of my favorite weapons. The Centerfire is a really strong weapon for early waves and later waves. Railgun is really good because it has so many good pairings with other weapons like the Centerfire, Winchester, 500 Magnum. You could even go with other weapons if you're going with like Survivalist and taking the Railgun, or Medic and taking the Railgun. Then you even have more options. You could take something like a P90 or a Medic SMG or something. But then there's also weapons like the M14. That's a great flexible weapon for a tier 3 weapon that just allows you to fight everything pretty effectively. Or the FAL, which is what I would consider an upgrade from the M14, but at a higher cost. You have a lot of really good choices here, and this one was really difficult to actually pick which ones would win, because there's so many times where it could have went one way or the other, where if we're just going for flexibility here, M14 wins, and then that would be interesting between the M14 and the Winchester, or like the M14 and the FAL, or the Winchester and the FAL. There's a lot of very good bracket fights right here. I really enjoy this. We have a couple more of these to do. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this. Thank you guys so very much for watching it. I really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did and you're not subscribed, be sure that you get subscribed. That way you get notifications whenever I post any of these videos. Special thanks to all of my patrons and members over here on YouTube. You guys really help out the channel a lot. And I will talk to all of you guys next time. Till then, stay cool and bye.